And sometimes we get confused because there's three parts to it. You have the first part, which is the parable itself. Then you have the second part, which is this sort of question and response thing about who gets it, you know. And then you have the third part, which is an interpretation. And I sat up all night thinking I could talk all day on those three parts. So I'm going to skip the third part today. We'll do that some other time. But let's look at the first part for a little bit. The first part is this. Along comes a sower. Now the translation says that it's a farmer, but it could have been a woman just as well. You know, I mean, think about this. None of us has ever seen this probably anymore, unless you've been to really foreign, you know, to foreign realms, which are somewhat more impoverished perhaps even than ours. But you remember that the sower had a bag that he would put on his left side, right? Burlap, something like that. Maybe an old goat skin, something like that. And in the bag would be all these seeds. And the sower would simply take clumps of seed and broadcast it. That's where the word broadcasting comes from in terms of radio, by the way. And if you go to London, you'll find on the frieze of the BBC building, that's what the picture, what's depicted there. By the great craftsman Eric Gill, there is a sower who sows the seed on the BBC building. So that's where all that broadcasting thing comes from. So think about that, about the broadcasting. And then you have the places where the seeds lie. Okay? Well, that's going to happen no matter what. There are going to be some places where the seeds grow up, right? And there are going to be some places where the seeds don't grow. But then there's going to be this larger space where the seeds grow up. And notice at the end of the parable, it says that there were like 30, 60, and 100-fold. Agricultural scientists who have studied the ancient Near East and its farming patterns and things like that would say that 10%, a tenfold increase would be magnanimous. So when Jesus says there's a 100% increase, it's like we say, hold it, buddy. I don't think we can go that far. Can we really? 100% increase? But think about it in a different way now. Christ is in our midst. Right, so here's the deal with the parable. The parable is really Jesus casting a net over us, broadcasting to all of us and saying, here's the seed. This is the seed growing up right here. And you're all 100%. The seed is growing up right here. Christ is in our midst, and Christ is in your midst. Through baptism, through the Eucharist, through all manner of other reasons, Christ is within you and bringing you forward. But wait a minute, there's one more thing about this parable you've got to take care of. And that's, notice how the emphasis is on the growth, right? It's on how the seed grows up. And in another place in the Gospel, Jesus speaks about the mustard seed, says it's a tiny seed that grows up to be this gigantic bush. So that's what you and I are. Maybe we're mustard seeds, you know. And each of us is growing in a pattern that is significantly connected to who we are, where we've come from, what we do in life. And we are growing in that particular direction into the fullness of who we are supposed to be. That's what this parable is all about. And you know what? That second part then, where Jesus says, well, you know, this is given to those of you who are disciples to dig it. You get it. People on the outside, they don't get it. Right? And that's because they have not yet not only heard, but experienced the kingdom of God in the person and the work of Jesus. And now, within our own lives, we experience that. And that's what we call theosis in orthodoxy, a funny little word. It just means spiritual growth, growing to be the most human you can possibly be. So often atheists get confused about this nonsense. Or they become nonsensical about this, is what I really mean to say. Atheists think that you have to somehow or another believe in a God out there, and then you don't believe in that God out there anymore because your reason tells you that there isn't one. But we know better than that. We know that it's on a different level of comprehension. When Jesus says the kingdom of God comes among you, by gum, there it is. And that's what that little section after the parable is all about. It's like some people are just not going to get it. And this isn't Calvinism, folks. It's not predestination to heaven or hell. It's none of that business. It's just that some people are always going to be blind to the fact that the kingdom is really among us. And it is. And it's the upside down kingdom, you know? It's like life turned upside down. Because think about what the core of this kingdom is. Jesus comes and he says to us, well, you know, in the middle of the gospel, there's James and John, and they say, you know, when you come into your kingdom, can I be your foreign secretary? Can I be the Secretary of State? And Jesus says, you guys have still not got it. Because what I'm talking about is a kingdom that comes inverted. If you want to be big mahaf in this kingdom, then serve everybody. You got to be a servant in order to be a big deal in this particular kingdom. That's what he says in that famous passage in the 10th chapter of Mark. You know, out there, everybody says, boy, you got to go for power. You want power, you get a PhD. You want power, you get an MBA, and you go out and you work like crazy for some corporation. You're going to make all kinds of money. That's how you become a big deal. Or you go into politics. That's another way. And look at the nonsense we've got going all around us in politics these days. I submit to you that ain't the kingdom of God. And Jesus says, you know, that as you begin to learn how to empty out your ego and serve other people to that extent, although it's not quite said this way, I will enter into your heart and fulfill for you what it means to be a human being. That's what we're here for. That's what you're here for. That's what we're all here for. That's what this church exists for, in order to support each one of us as we grow toward the fullness of faith, the fullness of life that God has intended for us. And we don't know what that is in advance. It's a dance, it's a walk, it's a waltz through life to do this. But oh my God, is it full of joy and peace and happiness and salvation. And that's what that parable's about today. I got to go back to the other lesson, though. I'm sorry, I just had to add a few more words. That other lesson, the epistle lesson from 2 Corinthians, is really interesting. We talked a little bit about it last night with those of us who were here for Vespers. And if you read that passage right, Paul is saying, you know, I boast a lot in my faith. I'm cool. I'm big. You know, and darn it, I can't help it. I shouldn't boast. I know I shouldn't boast, but I still do it anyway. So then Paul goes on and says, you know, I knew a guy who was caught up in the third heaven. He experienced paradise. And then he goes on to say, well, I'm not going to boast about that anymore. Meaning, I can't talk about this because I know people will make fun of me. They'll think that I've, gone off the rocker or something like that I've had this kind of an experience. But there are lots of us, many of you here have had some experience of the presence of God in your life, or else you wouldn't be here. I mean, why bother to get up on a Sunday morning and come if that's not, if that's not like the beginning of the trail for you, why even bother to be here? So Paul says, I've had this kind of an experience. I'm not going to boast about it, but then he goes on, and this is the really important point. He goes on to say, it's all tied up in the cross and the resurrection of Christ. So if you've had these experiences, if you've had these kind of mystical awarenesses in your life, wrap it into the figure of Christ, because that's where it belongs. Christ will fulfill all of your mystical experiences. Christ will take them all up into himself. They're just little clues that life is far bigger than we could ever possibly imagine. But remember, Christ is in our midst.
He is.
That's right. Period. See you later. Now, I would like, by the way, beginning, I know I'm not the pastor here yet. I'm still filling in for this particular week, but I would really like to add a few things to our service, which is actually subtracting a few things. I was at my favorite monastery when I was on my way to Vermont a couple of weeks ago. And I noticed that at the New Steep Monastery, they do a couple things that I said to Father Christopher, you know, I think I want to take that back. And among the things they do is they have a period of silence after the sermon. Just in the event that those who hear it might want to just keep going and thinking, might just want to keep going and feeling just for a few minutes. So let's take just a few minutes of quiet to do that.
The sea